We're just going to give it another minute before we start. People are still coming in and we want to welcome everybody. So a couple more seconds here. So I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sarah Porter, and I am the Executive Director of Victory Program. This is our second virtual roundtable this year. I think it's this year, yes. And we're pleased to have you here. It's really exciting to see some familiar names in the participant list. Part of me is selfishly wishing we were in one room and I could, chat with you face to face. But we'll take what we can get these days. So it's lovely to have all of you here. I also want to thank first, before we start, Life Science Cares. Life Science Cares has been a phenomenal partner to Victory Program. We very much appreciate kind of all the tangible and intangible support they give us, including hosting this event. So thank you, Life Science Cares. Let me introduce you to the other individuals who are going to participate in this conversation. Along with myself, we have Deneysha Rivera. I'll just ask you to turn your camera on and then I'll give you a second to introduce yourself. We have Diandra Blackwood and Michaella Jones. So I get the privilege of working day to day with each one of these individuals who are phenomenal in who they are and the work they do. I'm really excited for you to hear directly from them some of the work we're doing, Victory Programs is doing, addressing particularly the issue of homelessness at Mass and Cass. So let me start by asking each one of you to introduce yourself, maybe the basics of who you are, what you do, why did you choose to do this work, and how is what you're doing connected to the idea of solving homelessness in Mass and Cass. Maybe before I ask you to do that, maybe I should start with myself. So like I said, my name is Sarah Porter. I am the Executive Director here at Victory Programs. That means I get to do all kinds of fun stuff, most of which involves stacks of paper, but that's the work I do. I have done this work, homelessness work, human service work, my whole career. In some ways, I feel very lucky to be leading this organization at this particular point in time. There are big problems that we are solving, but we are solving, or big problems that we are facing, but we are solving them with excellent, strong partners, with strong teams, with the ability to move things around in ways we've never been able to do before. So let me turn it over to you. Deneysha, can I ask you to start by introducing yourself?
Of course you can. Hi, everyone. My name is Deneysha Rivera, and I'm the Housing Search and Stabilization Specialist here at Victory Programs. So one of the reasons why I do what I do is because I do highly believe in that everyone deserves a chance and a place to call home. So that's just to sum it up and nip that in the bud. And how I'm connected to the situation in the Mass Cass area, or what I do is connected to it, is that I help provide an opportunity for those out there so they can be able to access housing.
Awesome. Thanks, Deneysha. Diandra?
Hi, I'm Diandra Blackwood, and I am the Harm Reduction Services Manager at Victory's new program called the Victory Connector. Why do I do this work? I come to this work with like a lot of lived experience under my belt, and that is kind of what drove me to this field. And what keeps me here is my passion for creating a community amongst the folks in the Mass and Cass area, especially like the most marginalized of the individuals that we engage with on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. Thanks, Diandra. As I was thinking about it, you and I have worked together for a good amount of time. How long have you been at Victory Program?
6 years next month.
I was going to say, it's been a minute.
Yeah.
It's been fun. And Michaella, Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaella Jones. I'm the Interim Director of Housing here at Victory Programs. I come to do this work for a multitude of reasons, but one of which is that I love serving people who use drugs. A lot of personal connections to drug use, and so this is a very near and dear situation to my heart, and how my work really impacts the situation down at Mass and Cass as we work to house folks straight from Mass and Cass in our housing sites, both in the transitional and permanent sites that we operate. So we work in conjunction with the city, the state, and a lot of community partners to make sure that the folks down at Mass and Cass are getting access to the housing they need.
That's awesome. Thanks, Michaella. So if you are listening to this call or you're participating in this roundtable and you're not sure what Mass and Cass is, I'm going to tell you to minimize your screen and Google search it. And there will be about 9,000 articles. Probably more than half of them will be, what can I say, derogatory towards the individuals we work with. If you dig deep, you will find some that are hopeful. But that is a very specific neighborhood in Boston where we, Victory Programs, and a significant amount of other individuals and resources or organizations spend a good amount of time attempting to address issues. We can talk about it a little bit more. Let me give a brief history of how we ended up in this place, how we ended up with this mix of people and this particular topic, and then we can go from there. So Victory Programs has been around for a good amount of time. We were formed in the early 70s, very specifically looking at issues of substance use treatment, substance use addiction for individuals coming home from the Vietnam War. At that time, the idea that those men in particular were not able to easily reintegrate back into community or society, that they weren't doing well in the communities that they had once upon left, and were having a hard time finding connection. That's kind of where our roots were, and we have grown since then from there. But still continuing to bring some of those general ideas. I heard Deneysha and Diandra talk about opportunity, passion, community. Those are things that are laced throughout all the work we do. Our specialty has become this place of intersection, the place where homelessness and substance use treatment intersect, or substance use addiction intersect, the place where chronic health conditions, mental health, homelessness, disconnection, and isolation, those places which can create incredibly complex situations for an individual, that has sort of become our sweet spot. And understanding that when I use that phrase, it is a very painful place full of suffering for many, many individuals. And that's where we kind of have made it our priority to lean into that space. COVID, the arrival of COVID, like it did for so many other things, sort of revved all of that up, made everything that much more intense. We've used the phrase around here a lot that COVID took those individuals who were already living in the margins and pushed them further into the margins, which meant situations like those at Mass and Cass became much more complex. You had people who were homeless, people who had really chronic and chaotic substance use, people who had undiagnosed or untreated mental health, living in the open air, living and spending their days and nights outside. Understanding it had, when you have multiple complex problems, you need multiple complex solutions. And that is what we have aimed to do, and done it in a variety of different ways. Each one of these three individuals works in different programs and Victory Programs, all of which sort of pour into that problem of attempting to solve some of those situations in Mass and Cass. Kind of before we go forward, Deneysha, you were one of the first people, if we want to use the phrase, on the ground. You were hired very specifically to do housing work with the individuals in Mass and Cass. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like? How was it complicated? Tell us some stories about what those early days for you were like.
I definitely can, but before I begin, can you hear me okay? Because I heard I had a lot of static.
You do have a lot of static.
Okay, I don't know. I'm gonna try this.
Okay.
Can you hear me better?
That's a little bit better, I guess. Give it a shot. Let's see what happens.
All right.
You know what? Can you figure that out? Can I I don't want to skip your story. Go ahead.
Sure.
No, try again. You might be good.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, you're good. Go.
Awesome. So yeah, so it basically just started me and my coworkers, of course, will go out on the field and we will look for people who was interested in housing. So that's the first start, just looking for the people that was interested in housing. And that was complicated on its own because a lot of people are wrapped up in everything that's going on in their environment that they can't even focus on, housing. So that was kind of like the struggle that we had. But once we bypass that and we are able to work with individuals, I do notice that once we do work with the individuals and we're able to get them some type of stable, whether that be in a shelter or a single room occupancy or a transitional, transitional program with the Victory programs, they were much more cooperative, and a lot of it had to do with their environment. So once they were out of that environment, it was a lot easier to work with the clients and to focus on their goal, which was housing. I had a couple of people that I actually got or I met in the Mass Cass area, and they are still housed with Victory. They are in the SRO, which is the single room occupancy program, and they are looking for something more independent. Of course, will be their own apartment and stuff. I have more than one person like that, so I didn't want to just put one story on one person. I do have multiple clients that I did meet out there, and they are currently still housed with Victory, and they constantly tell me how thankful they are because it took them so long just to have an opportunity like this happen. I don't want to keep going, but if you have any certain questions or anything you want to, just let me know.
That brings a good point. If you do have specific questions, I believe you can put them in the chat and we will, they'll get filtered to us. So let me pause and do a few definitions. Understanding that this is the world that we operate in every day, and we use lingo that we know that is maybe unfamiliar to others. Michaella, can I ask you, this is your world, can I ask you to define some of these words, low threshold versus transitional versus permanent, SRO? Can you give a quick, overview of what those are?
Sure. So I think to set the stage, first and foremost, I will be speaking on how Victory programs interprets low threshold. I say that just because there's a lot of interpretations out there, so I don't want to speak for the entirety. I do want to keep a focus on how Victory programs uses that. So for us, a low threshold model just means as low barrier as possible, which means that we meet people truly where they are, so they can come to us in any given state, and we will try our best to serve them and provide them with services. Now, when we look at low threshold in terms of housing, what that means is that we are taking folks who are straight from Mass and Cass into housing. And typically they're going to go into one of two sites, which is either a permanent site or a transitional site. Permanent is what it sounds like, which is that they get leased up and they are able to live in what we refer to as more of an SRO model or single room occupancy. This means that they're not getting an entire apartment to themselves. They're typically getting a room that they can lock that is a part of more rooms on a floor with a common area, shared bathroom, shared kitchen, shared living space, all of those. So permanent sites, we have 3 of those that we're currently operating, and then we have 2 transitional sites that we operate. The transitional models vary from place to place in terms of what they physically look like, but they all serve the same purpose, which is that folks can stay with us until they are ready to transition to a more permanent model. So typically folks come straight off of the street, and a lot of times it might take them 12 months, 24 months in order to get stabilized enough to move on to their next stage, which is typically trying to find them stable, permanent, supportive housing in the community. I think I covered them all, but if there's any more definitions, let me know.
Excellent. One of the pieces that I want to add is that a lot of this work, the housing first work or the low threshold work, or however we want to call it, is rooted in this concept of harm reduction. And that's sort of one of the philosophies that Victory Programs has always held dear to heart. Diandra, do you want to give your title right there? It says Harm Reduction Manager. Do you want to give us a working definition of harm reduction?
Yeah. I think a lot more people over time have become familiar with the term harm reduction, which is really great. But what I've seen in it has become like a little bit watered down. And I really look at harm reduction as like harm reduction, big H, big R, like the movement of harm reduction. And then harm reduction, like the theory of practice, lower H, lower R. And to kind of briefly go over like what like little h, little r harm reduction is, it's like reducing potential harm that comes from like doing potentially risky things, activities, behaviors. When I'm talking to someone who might be skeptical or new to the theory or the concept, I always talk about seatbelts. Seatbelts are like really something that like everyone is familiar with in a day-to-day setting usually. And I say, you know, cars have seatbelts in them. And like when you're in a car, driving a car, there is a risk of getting into a car accident. And seatbelts help prevent any some damage if you do get into a car accident. You know, a lot of people, when they hear about like harm reduction in a public health sense and in like a syringe exchange sense, a lot of folks are like, well, aren't you like promoting the use of drugs? And I always, you know, loop back to seatbelts. Seatbelts don't promote getting into accidents, but if accidents happen, the seatbelt is there to keep you safe. And just like the provision of sterile use equipment is there to prevent soft tissue infections, transmission of like infectious diseases. And so that's kind of like the theory behind little h, little r, right? Low barrier, low access, low barrier, high access, you know. The big H, big R is really, really important, and sometimes is what gets lost. It's a movement. And it started in like the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And when syringe exchange programs were being brought about, a lot of like activist organizations helped bring that out, like ACT UP. And you saw a lot of harm reduction happening with the needle exchanges and the sexual health programs and like condom distributions. As the years on, it went and evolved as the needs changed. You know, we saw in the mid to late 2000s, as fatal overdoses were increasing, the need for the distribution of Narcan increased. But the thing was that it was illegal for a non-medical provider to have Narcan. So public health providers working in a harm reduction setting, you know, they made sure that people had Narcan. It was a radical act of public health. It was a radical act of harm reduction. And it's always making sure that people have access to the things that are going to keep them safe.
Wait, but let's stop right there. That's perfect. People have access to the things that are going to keep them safe, which is housing. You know, housing can be in some ways what keeps people safe, not just from like the elements or not just from like, you know, bad people or predators, but from all kinds of things. There's a picture that hangs in my office somewhere around here that says, healthcare is housing, or housing is healthcare. They're two.
And can I add to that real quick? You know, we say safe a lot, and my coworker Azzy said this beautiful thing recently. We're here to provide safing, not saving, and I think that really really puts our approach to it. We are here to provide
safing.
Absolutely. I don't even know if it's a word, but I think you get what I mean, right? We're providing safety. We're not trying to save people, because that is what they're there for. We're providing safety through community, through health, and through harm reduction and housing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's also some of the core components of both harm reduction, big H and little h, as well as low threshold or, you know, housing first, is the idea of self-determination. You pick, you decide, what do you want? So sure, there's some science behind the fact that your health outcomes are better if you live indoors versus outdoors. But who am I to decide that you have to live in a, you know, 3-bedroom condo in Waltham? Like, it may work out really well that you've got this tiny little place in a different neighborhood. So, but back up a second. So somebody tell me, Deneysha, you spend the most amount of time there, but I don't want to put it on you, but why are there so many homeless people in Madison Cass right now? Like, why are there so many people on the streets day and night in that neighborhood?
Well, obviously, I can't answer that question with just one answer, but I can say that the reason why I believe there is so much is um, because there's so many different mixes. So we have people that are using, we have people that there's mental health, there's substance abuse. So there's different areas that need to be addressed that are getting addressed, but probably need to be a little more concentrated on, because before someone can focus on housing, they have to be mentally there so they can think about the housing. And as well as with, substances, as, they need to be a little, I'm not saying 100% clear or, sober, but they need to be mentally stable so they can be able to know what's going on, because housing it's a process and you need to be there mentally.
Yeah. Anyway, so why don't folks just go into shelter? Michaella? Deandra, you're jumping at the bit. Go ahead. You go.
There's a lot of reasons as to why someone might choose to stay on the street versus shelter. But one of the biggest reasons, specifically in Boston, is that our shelters are not created to accommodate people who use drugs, / especially people who are using fentanyl and stimulants like meth and crack. And that is because short-acting substances like fentanyl, meth, and crack, you have to use more often in order to avoid withdrawal. You cannot currently leave our shelter system at night and then come back in. If you leave, you're out for the night. So that's one reason that people often stay outside. Another reason is, up until recently, there was a lot of stigma against syringes and safe use materials. And so if folks were bringing syringes with them into the shelter, that's enough for them to get barred from the shelter. So people who use drugs are often faced with the question of, do I avoid withdrawal, or do I stay in withdrawal and have shelter for the night? And it's not an easy decision to make. And that's one of many, many reasons as to why people don't choose to go into shelter. And a lot of folks do that as, oh, well, it's just a choice, but it's so much deeper than that, because our systems are what have failed people. Our systems have not allowed folks to make conscious decisions for themselves that keep themselves safe, which is why I think what Victory Programs does with our low threshold housing model is great, because we allow people to use drugs inside. And I know that for some, that's a huge concept to take in right now. So I understand if you need a moment to think about that and pause and put some questions into the chat, but our model is helping people stay indoors.
Deandra, I know you're dying you're hopping to say something, and I'll let you go first and then I'll come back. Go ahead, Deandra, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Deneysha said, there is a list of reasons. And it's not anything that like everyone can tackle. Like the first thing that comes to mind is like, not every indoor space is a safe space for each individual, right? I'm thinking queer and trans folks, gender nonconforming people, people who do sex work. If people are experiencing trauma living out on the street, they have a lot more agency and they have a lot more choice around how they're going to protect themselves. Once they go into a shelter system, a day center, typically all of those things that they have control over, they don't anymore. They don't know who they're going to see there. They don't know how they're going to be treated, especially for queer individuals. Like if I'm a female identifying person, but I'm assigned male at birth, I go into a women's shelter, I'm probably going to get harassed by the other females in there. But if I go to a male shelter, it's going to be just as worse in a different way, right?
That being said, right, I will say, many people do seek shelter in the state and the city shelter system. The individuals that we tend to work with either don't or haven't or have been asked not to for any number of reasons. And what we have taken, we and partners with others have taken the chance of doing is, well, now what? What does it look like? We still believe that life is better indoors than outdoors. We still believe that you will be healthier and hopefully, ideally, happier inside for the vast majority of people. We know that, the research proves, just based on like basic outcomes, that is what happens. But what else changes? So what we've done since, I don't know, maybe the last 18 months, we've opened 62 units of what we're calling transitional housing, or, you know, they're different kind of shelter. What changes when someone goes inside as opposed to outside? Somebody tell me a story about that.
I can
Sorry.
go for it, Deneysha.
Real quick, I was just gonna say, once you're inside, you can just honestly have the moment to think. I think when you're outside, you just have so many things going on that you just have to focus on surviving. Once you're inside and you just have that moment to actually think and, you know, talk to yourself, you can focus on the next thing. When you're outside, you can't even have that moment. You just have to focus on eating. You have to focus on if you're using your drug use. You have to focus, if you're a woman, on surviving, because you can, you know, there's just so many different threats and things out there that you got to focus on, that housing seems to be the last thing on the list. But once you're inside, you can actually focus. I have so many clients that once they got inside, they started coming to me to try to sober up and try to go to detox and, you know, just pursue the next step.
Yeah,
And I'm sorry about that, Michaela.
What did you want to add?
Deneysha, you summed it up perfectly. All that I was going to add is that we see stabilization happen in so many different ways when folks come indoors. And it's not necessarily just that they're stabilizing because they have housing, but there's so many different supports that get added, especially in our programs when folks do come inside, because we're able to give them things like case management and housing search and meet with doctors and get food and access to water and showers. And there's so many things that happen when you can restore some of those basic human rights. And like Deneysha was saying, that's when we start to see different levels of stabilization in terms of how they feel about their housing, how their substance use is. If they're suffering from a chronic condition, are they now recognizing that they had that chronic condition? Are they able to treat the chronic condition and or seek out treatment? There's just so many pieces that start to align once someone comes in from survival mode off the street to being able to figure out their next steps when they're indoors.
I have a story.
Of course.
It's like a perfect example.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was like the second day, the mobile prevention team, which I used to be a part of, we transitioned all of our services to work out of 965 Mass Ave, which was the old admin building, which is now the Victory Connector. We were there for a very long time, every single day, Monday through Friday. And there was a young woman who every single morning when I came in would be like in the little alcove, like just getting out of the wind, trying to like kind of hide. And, you know, we'd bring her tea, we'd bring her coffee, we'd bring whatever snacks. And we all kind of developed a relationship with her. She was so tiny, maybe 60, 70 pounds, like soaking wet. And then one day, I just didn't see her anymore. And fast forward to a few months ago, I was at Stanhope Street where the mobile prevention team was located out of. And, you know, we have volunteers there every day helping us like make kits. And this young woman comes up to me who was one of our volunteers. She's like, did you used to work at like Mass Ave near the U-Haul? And I was like, yeah, like kind of like, you know, during the pandemic. She's like, I remember you. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, I don't remember you, but like, I'm glad. And then she told me the story about how I used to like bring her tea, and I just didn't even recognize her because like she had gone to jail. She ended up in one of our programs after she was released. She had put on all this weight. She was healthy. She was like beaming ear to ear. And she was like doing a job readiness program and like volunteering for the team that, you know, had helped her. And, you know, she was like, you know, I want to do this work one day. And it was just this moment of like, it was just very
loaded.
Yeah, but like that is what connection and security and community can bring.
Yeah,
you know.
it's an amazing story. And I will say, low threshold, the idea of what is low threshold means you don't, the individual coming to access services brings nothing with them. They can come in as they are. And often it isn't with a sense of, hey, could you help me out? Sometimes it's super aggressive and super pissed off and, you know, I don't really need anything and can I just use your bathroom? And it takes a very slow, conscious, patient, compassionate, welcoming environment over and over and over again to get someone to even to the place where they'll have a conversation, let alone to the place where your individual Deandra is. Like that can be a slow, steady, well, not even steady. It can go up, it can go down, it could be all over the place. I want to take a second here and show people a little video. We are talking here about homelessness and, you know, how steps to stability, and the idea that you know, housing is a huge piece of stability, but it isn't often the first step. Kind of internally, we've often used the phrase, the work Deneysha does, jumping from tent or from the street to an apartment, that's a big jump. What we have done, this, what you're seeing the picture of is our new, what we call Victory Connector. So this is a space on Mass Ave. It used to be our admin building. We blew out some walls and built it around. It's a navigation center where individuals can come inside, can use the bathroom, can sit down, can be safe, can tested for, you know, hepatitis C, HIV, whatever, you know, might be going on for them. They can access a case manager. They can participate in groups. They can work with Deneysha around housing services. This is kind of the first step in a place to achieving stability. This program is opening kind of as we speak. Currently, it is serving primarily women, trans, and those who identify as non-binary. That's where we are starting as of today. I will kind of echo off Deandra's story here. As someone who worked out of that building for years, I would often interact with people who are standing outside the front, and the first thing people say to you, before you even open your mouth, they say, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. They don't even, you haven't even said anything, you haven't even asked them to move, but that is their number one. Okay, I know you're gonna ask me to move. And we have now finally built this space where when we open that door, we don't have to say move, we can say, come on in. Like, we want you to come inside, even if it's to do nothing, even if it's for you to sit down and be safe and take a deep breath. And ideally, we're gonna get to know you. You know, if you kind of spend 4 hours sleeping here, when you wake up, we're gonna be standing there with a cup of coffee, and ideally, Deneysha is gonna come in and go, hey, you wanna talk about housing? Let's go. We're looking for those moments of lucidity to help engage, build a conversation, and move forward. That was kind of a quick view of the connector. Deandra, you're the manager of this service. Do you have anything you wanna add? Oh, unmute, yep.
So I'm a co-manager. So
Wow.
it's me and Azzy. Azzy manages like the member services side of things, and I manage harm reduction services. So I do all of like the navigation and the manages of like the management of like program that we have at the connector.
And tell me what it's been like so far.
Well, it's been a very long process. I think we started talking about this like a year ago, probably more than that. It's been very exciting to kind of create the space, making a space that like everyone is going to feel warm and welcome. It's been an adventure going out, sending teams out to like recruit, and just like meeting people and like asking them what they want and what they need and working to get it, because that's kind of like how we approach things at the team. Even though a lot of folks on our team have a lot of lived experience, we want to know what they want right now, and we work to get it. It's been a slow start. I think with any new program opening, folks are kind of a little bit hesitant.
Yeah.
But slowly we're getting more and more each day. Folks know about our program. Our target audiences are definitely interested. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
great to see folks come in and just like lay down on one of our big couches and like watch Netflix with us. And like, yeah, and like that's probably going to be like the first step for a lot of people, and then maybe after a couple of visits it's like maybe it's jumping on the computer for some like, I don't know, some
Yeah.
job readiness kind of training, or getting tested, or joining one of our support groups, or eventually becoming part of our cab or community access board.
That's great.
I was just gonna say, like, within all of us, I think that something that's really good about Victory is just the consistency. A lot of places, you're not gonna find someone that's just consistently trying to make sure that you did your applications, or you're just on top of everything. And that's one thing about our program that we have. So that's what I wanted to mention.
That's awesome. Michaella, can you connect what's happening at the connector to housing?
Of course. So all of the work that happens at the connector mirrors the work that we try to do at our low threshold sites. And it actually is a perfect pairing, because a lot of the time our folks during the day will still head down to Mass and Cass because that's where their community is. And that's where the folks that they trust are. And that's where some of the services they've been accessing for years are. And a lot of our folks do need some additional supports that housing by itself can't necessarily provide. And so we try to work as much as we can across the agency to really make sure we're working in conjunction with each other. And the work that Diandra and their team are doing is so helpful to the work that we do in housing, because they know they have places that they can go and still be served by Victory Programs employees. And they know that they feel safe with us. They feel like they can access the things that they need with us, and that they can be honest. We'll take folks on their worst day and still greet them with a smile and say, hey, what's up? Or come back to them in an hour and say, we feeling better now? And being able to do that, the work that they do at the connector, especially with harm reduction access and getting them the syringes that they need or the Narcan that they need, they take all of that back with them to our transitional and permanent sites. And so they're able to really bridge that gap in terms of services that they need, because we can now provide them with a lot of that in-house. And so it's really special to be able to say, hey, we're working on your substance use here in our transitional site to make sure that you're as safe as possible. Have you talked to the folks down at the connector? Have you been there yet? Because they're waiting for you, right? And so now we can really work in the most beautiful way together to say, hey, across the board, we have you when it comes to harm reduction services, because a lot of the work that we do at our housing sites has to do with their substance use. And so if we're not checking in to make sure that they're using in the safest possible way, then we're doing them a huge disservice. And so we try our best to make sure that we're still having those conversations, even though we're providing them housing. That's not at all where we stop. We always have those follow-up conversations about their health, their well-being, their substance use, their mental health, sexual health, whatever it is that they need, and then we can connect them directly to the folks.
So we've got a whole string of questions starting to come in here. So two are related here. The idea that when people come into housing, what challenges do they have in terms of adjusting to being in a safe space? And that connected to, what are some of the biggest challenges for the frontline staff, for people that are working there? Who wants to address some of that? Michaella, you kind of oversee some of the residential sites. What are some of the challenges people have?
So I think that there's not a lot out there when it comes to transition from living on the street, living outdoors, to living inside. So sometimes folks don't understand that it's not just necessarily mental and emotional transitions or physical space transitions, but it's so much deeper. There's so many levels to that. So some examples of this are that sometimes it takes folks months to be able to sleep 7 days a week inside. Some of our folks still sleep multiple nights outside on the street because they're just not comfortable being indoors 24/7. Some folks need to transition with their hygiene. If they haven't had access to running water or showers or laundry services, that's not going to come second nature to them. So some of our folks we have those conversations of checking in to say, hey, you know, it seems like you maybe haven't showered this week. Let's talk about that, right? And the way that we approach it is always from a place of care. It's never from a place of judgment. And so that alone takes a long time for people to be able to trust us. These are also folks who are the most vulnerable population, the most acute, and they're also the folks that get promised the most amount of services. So the folks down at Mass and Cass have a deep, deep distrust of systems, as they should, because our systems have failed them. And so when they come to us, they're not going to trust us day one to say, we got you, we're going to get you into permanent housing. It might take us 6 months to a year to have that conversation, but when we do, it's so good because they recognize that they can really trust in us. So those are some of the biggest transitions that we see, but I also want to leave space for my colleagues.
I'll also say, just to add here, that the systems are broken, but some of the systems, not all of them, were designed to be broken. We're designed in such a way to hold people where they are. So I just want to acknowledge that. Hopefully none of those people are on this call and are going to, you know, ring my phone and be all over me. But we like to say the systems are broken, but in some ways they're working the exact way they were set up to work. But Diandra, go ahead.
I think what's difficult for people, like not just even going into housing, but like going off the street into like a day space, is like when you're out on the street, you have like, you're in survival mode. And like your internal speed, your internal speediness is very, very high. And when you enter like a quiet, a safe environment that has 4 walls, and the speediness of that space is a lot lower, it can be jarring, right? Imagine like being in a car that's going really fast and then slams on its brakes. It's a huge adjustment. And, you know, a lot of people are still, you know, acting in a way that, you know, like they're in survival mode, and it can be hard to exist in a space that, you know, that might not always be necessary. I think, you know, you mentioned like, what are some challenges for staff?
Yeah.
I think like, you know, living in these moments with these folks, and, you know, it's very easy to allow some of that energy to cross over into like direct care staff's life. It's very hard when you have a staff filled with peers, but also just like really passionate people, caring, loving people across the board. It's really hard to like end your day and like not take any of that with you.
Yeah, and then that makes it hard to continue to do this work for the long haul, right? Yeah. Deneysha, as somebody who does direct service, someone who's meeting with people kind of all the time, what would you say some of the challenges are?
Well, for the people that are actively on the street right now, just meeting them.
Yeah.
Oh, for a staff,
Yeah.
I think the same thing like Diandra said, it's just kind of like churning it off, you know, and then going home and just living your life when you just was helping someone with such a, you know, critical situation in their life. So it's just turning it off. And I think that, I mean, I guess once I don't know if it ever can turn off, right? But you have to find a way to balance everything. So it's just balance, finding balance is was a challenge. So, but once you get that, I feel like, you know, it'll be a little better.
So somebody has asked a question about decentralization, and you really can't talk about Mass and Cass without talking about decentralization. Many of our neighbors and friends and you know, the local population has talked about, you know, there are so many services concentrated in the Mass and Cass neighborhood that by keeping all those services there, you're continuing to concentrate the problem in that area. And so there has been, you know, cries for a long time about decentralizing services from the Mass and Cass area. There is a big homeless shelter there. There is a multiple healthcare systems there. There is a methadone clinic there. There's a house of corrections there. Did I miss one? What else is there? There's a lot of stuff there. And so there has been pressure put on individuals or, organizations like Victory Programs to decentralize our services. So when we opened started to get ready to open the Victory Connector, we were met with a lot of pushback about, well, no, you need to decentralize. And I have stood and said, we have opened 2 transitional shelters, neither one of which, well, the big one is not in Mass and Cass. We have opened how many units of permanent housing? I want to say it's 30?
33.
33 units of permanent housing. This is within like the past year. It is not in Mass and Cass. And not to mention the community services that we're doing in the Back Bay, relocating some things to Jamaica Plain. We have done a good amount of work. I feel very confident in saying that Victory Programs has done their fair share of work to decentralize services. That being said, I have dozens of women in particular every day surrounding that particular block where we opened the Victory Connector who need additional assistance to get out of that neighborhood. And so that's why we kind of leaned into, I need to use this space I have that is primed for services to be able to bring people in, have them take that deep breath, connect them to folks like Diandra and Deneysha to move them out of that neighborhood into the programs Michaella is running, where they can stabilize and access housing, and ideally start to think about what do they want their life to look about. Somebody said, start to talk to themselves. I mean, that's an amazing concept. Like, start to think about, who am I and what do I want to do? That doesn't happen when you're standing on a corner being preyed upon. It happens when you're, I don't know how to use it yet, but when you're safing yourself. I'm trying to work that word in, but it doesn't work. Go ahead, Deandra, what do you want to add?
Okay, so I think when we talk about the concept of like centralization or like decentralization, the focus is always on like, but the service providers are causing this centralization. But like, I get very upset and passionate about like reframing that narrative of like what is happening in the other areas.
Right.
Like about a couple of years ago, as Mass and Cass got a little bit more energetic, a little bit more dangerous, there was a movement of folks that didn't want to be there anymore, but they didn't want to be in a shelter. So there was an increase of folks in the Copley area, Back Bay, Southwest Corridor, Fenway. And so we saw that movement of people who wanted to be out on the street, and that's where they felt safe, but they didn't want to be at Mass and Cass because that was not their energy. But then the systems that are in place in the communities, in those areas, made up of like business and property owners, put so much pressure to get them out of those areas. Get them out of the fence, get them out of out of Copley Square, get them out of Back Bay. When we started providing like drop-in services in the Stanhope area, which is right across the street from the Back Bay station,
Right.
I remember having like a lot of pushback from some community members. And like, oh, are you going to like are you going to direct them to the services that are in Mass and Cass? And it's like, pick one. Do you want to have a variety of services all over the city? Or do you not want these people near the businesses, near where the tourists are going, near where the students are going?
Right, I hear you. Let's use that. So understanding we're getting closer to time here. So 2 questions that I'll put out there, and you answer whichever one you want. So one, what do you wish people understood more about the individuals at Mass and Cass? Playing off what you're saying, Diandra, about, do you want these people? Like, what do you wish individuals understood more about the individuals at Mass and Cass? And or there's lots of questions coming in about what can people do to help? So take whichever one of those you want. Michaella, you start.
All right. There's a lot of things that I could say about what I wish folks could understand about individuals living at Mass and Cass. but one of the biggest ones is understanding that substance use disorder is not a choice, and that people are often not choosing to be at Mass and Cass, but almost what Diandra was saying, they're forced there by many different external forces. And so I just wish that people could understand that, one, homeless folks are inherently not dangerous, substance users are inherently not dangerous, and that these are active members of our society and human beings, and that they deserve to be treated as such. We can't provide services if we're not also acknowledging the fact that they're humans that have complex things going on. And I think that often there's this talk about choice and substance users going over here and homeless folks over there, and they're not recognizing that these are human beings that we're talking about that have very real needs, and we can't just shuffle folks of all of this one need into one area and call it a day and think that it's a solution. We have to be able to provide services across the board in all communities and do it with care and compassion, because these are folks that are really struggling, and it's not a choice that they're making to stay in this position.
Deneysha, what would you like to add about how people could help, or what you wish people understood more of?
Just piggybacking off of what Michaella said, is just educating themselves on what substance use is, so they can understand that it's not a choice, it's something that they're battling right now. Maybe it'll open people's minds up a little differently, and I don't know how to explain it, but maybe when people think something's a choice, maybe if they know that it's not a choice, they'll be more understanding.
Can I also say one thing? I don't mean to cut you off, Diandra, but also for people that do choose to use drugs, that they're not less than, that they still are deserving of housing and access to resources. So like, I think a lot of folks also get that confused because we put values on different substances. So like drinking wine is okay, but doing fentanyl is not, you know what I mean? So I think if we treat substances the same across the board, you would also see that there's an increase of understanding, because if you use drugs or not, doesn't matter, you're still eligible and should be eligible for housing and basic services.
Yeah, I definitely, I find myself thinking all the time and trying to reflect back to people, like at a place where I'm looking at and going, well, what about those people? Like, and how do I, what do I want to do for those people? The reaction is really about, well, who do I want to be? Like, who is it about? It's me, and what do I want my reaction to be? And I want my reaction to be, and me, and speaking for myself individually, but also for this organization, to be one of compassionate care, to be where people are welcome in, where we care. What's your favorite kind of sandwich? Because we'll have that sandwich tomorrow, and trusting that you will come back tomorrow, and it'll take us a while. There are many people in one of the transitional sites we work with, that we run, that it took them months to sleep in the bed. They slept on the ground for months, and that was where people felt most comfortable. Okay, well, let's talk about it. What's it going to take to get you into the bed? And I want to be the person that cares about you being in the bed and you being safe, as opposed to, looking at, I don't know, looking through judging eyes, I guess. What about how can people help? What can people do to help? Diandra, you want to talk about what people can do to help?
I'd like to, okay, really quickly, what can people do to help? They can get trained in Narcan and overdose reversal. They can volunteer with us, and they can just get educated. But I do really want to answer that first question that Michaella and Deneysha really answered. I'm really passionate about it. What we see at Mass and Cass is the effect of America's war on children, America's war on women, America's war on Black and Brown communities, America's war on drugs, and America's war on the queer community. And when I say that, I mean, like, these are people who the mental health care system has failed, right? These are people with a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of trauma throughout their whole entire lives, that drugs have been the coping mechanism for. And because the US is not made for these communities of people, that relationship to substance use has become a tumultuous one and an unhealthy relationship with substance use. So yes, there is chemical dependency, but when you are using in a society that is not catered to who you are, it ends up with a unhealthy and a chaotic relationship with substance use. So it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I think if we add that, you use the word community, and there was a question that came in about, as people move into housing, how do you prevent them from returning to homelessness? And it's a quick and easy thing. Like, the answer to homelessness is housing. Period. End of story. It's done. Once you're housed, you're no longer homeless. That's the only problem that has been solved. Like, everything else continues to exist. And part of what keeps people in mass and cast, and I think sometimes keeps people where they are, is this community, is a connection. And so what prevents people from returning to homelessness, I feel very strongly that what prevents that is connection and community. And that could be within a building, it could be within your house, within your neighborhood, it could be at a community center, going to the Boston Living Center, it could be going to the connector. Ideally, I don't love the idea of people going back to mass and gas, but wherever that community is, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, someone knowing who you are, that's what prevents people from going back into homelessness. Like, that is what helps people land where they are. Does anyone have one final thing they have to say or want to say? How about a quick success story? What about that story that, what's just the top floor of the building that's loaded with plants? I love that apartment. You know where I'm going, Michaella? No, I'm trying to pitch you something and it's not working. There's one of the permanent supported housing places that we have opened where women in particular transition from mass and cast. So they've moved into this single room occupancy place, and talk about how it's decorated. I just adore how it's decorated.
So we have spent a lot of time thinking about how to help with that social connectedness. And so a huge part of that is the healing piece and the hope, and how can we instill those feelings in folks that realistically speaking probably won't feel healing or hope for a long time. And how do you generate that when, again, systems are broken and don't really encourage and support that? But we have done our best to try and support that by decorating, by providing art therapy, by providing common rooms for people to sit and watch Netflix or eat a snack. And we've seen a lot of success come from just folks being in those spaces. And part of that is because what all of the things we've talked about, which is that they get to be with themselves in a way that maybe they haven't before or haven't in a really long time. They get to be with others in a way that they are choosing, and that they get to be the drivers of how those interactions are happening. And we've been able to see folks go from being decades on the street to now moving into permanent housing with limited support. I mean, you can't say that the model of low threshold doesn't work, because it absolutely does. We're seeing some of the most complex cases come through all of our programs, but they're graduating. They're exiting onto a better life, and they get to define what that better life is. If it's just that they are using drugs a little bit less going forward, then we celebrate that. And I think that that's been something that's been really special to watch happen over time, is people are defining what success looks like for them, and we're celebrating it every step of the way.
That's exactly right. So as you can imagine, moving from the street to housing, there's a lot of things you need. People move in with just the clothes on their back, and sometimes those are really not, we shouldn't even have those. You can go to our website, which is bpi.org. There's a link there to like an Amazon wish list if you want to be involved in helping to furnish people's apartment or purchase supplies that are needed for the winter. There's also, you can find on there ways to volunteer or ways to donate and support the work we do. So I want to take a minute to thank each one of you. Deandra, Deneysha, Michaella, working with you is a total and complete joy. I mean, you are all absolutely phenomenal. I also want to thank LSC, Life Science Cares. You are amazing, amazing partners. And I want to thank those of you who are listening. The fact that you took a second to tune in, to think about this issue, to talk about this issue. You are also the partners we dream of working with, not only for changing the lives of those people that we're addressing, our clients, but also in gently starting to shift society in a way that these problems start to look different. So thank you to all of you. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you being here. So take good care.